Hello, welcome back to my channel and to today's video where I'll be sharing how we transformed our old 1990s indoor swimming pool into a usable space that suits us and our needs. A year after we moved in, we decided to give the pool a chance just to see if we would in fact use it enough to warrant keeping it. We did a mini makeover of the pool house, had the pool itself professionally cleaned, and I documented this makeover in a couple of videos. So if you'd like to see how it looked as a functional pool, then I'll leave links to those videos in the description box below. We used it maybe 4 times in the space of 8 months, and so it became very clear to us, along with factoring in the crazy high running costs, because remember, this is not a modern pool, that keeping it just wasn't for us. Now, in all fairness, we did not buy this property for the pool. We did, however, see potential in the pool building. We drained the pool a couple of years ago and then, as you can see, used it for storage. I suppose it kind of became a bit of a sunken garage or a basement. So, at the start of September, I set about the first task of clearing the pool. This gave us chance to have a cull of anything that we didn't need and then organise the things that we had left into categories. Some of you may be wondering why I had approximately 1 million cardboard boxes. Well, those were for vintage. I'd much rather reuse existing packaging than buy new. So this was an accumulation of packaging from about 4 years. And here I was just flat packing the boxes so it made them easier to store. We also stored tools, paint, spare tiles, spare flooring from various projects, lawnmower, power washer and seasonal decor in there. We left a few storage tubs inside the pool but moved them into the centre so there would be space to move around them. And I suppose at this point I should say we did not fill in the pool. We kept the pool and the plan was to build a framework and lay a floor over the top. So here Simon was measuring up for the framework and making a list of materials that would need to be purchased. We also enlisted the help of Simon's bestie, Cal, who you've seen before in our 3 bathroom renovation videos. He's a tradesman, so it's always good to have his opinion and ideas when working on a project like this. So together they started removing all the bullnosing from around the edge of the pool. This bullnosing wasn't flat like a tile, it sloped upwards, so it needed to be removed in order for the new floor to be level. The tiles around the pool would be staying in place and the new floor laid over the top. So Simon was just checking that this was all level before moving on to making the framework. Next, the joists were measured and cut to length and then placed roughly where they were going to go. Holes were then drilled into the walls of the pool and then the joists were secured with bolts and resin to make them extra secure. The joist hangers could then be added to the side supports and those joists cut to size and then secured into position. The next step was boarding over the joists and the tiles with plywood to create an even floor base. So at this point it started to feel more like an actual room, and a big room too. Cal went up into the roof to sort out the electrics. Since moving into this house, we've often found random wires that do absolutely nothing when doing a new project. So he figured out what was what and then removed anything that wasn't needed. And then he ran some new cable to the areas where we wanted to install some plug sockets. While Cal was busy with the spiders in the roof space, Simon started fixing down the plyboards with screws that were drilled into the wooden joists. And then the boys had to figure out how to make a hatch. Because, as I've mentioned, and as you can see, we kept the pool. But why? Well, for us, we thought it would be beneficial to utilise that hollow space for storage, as we had done for the past 2 years. And on another note, the pool is still there, all the pipework and of course the huge hole. So if any future owners wanted to take up the floor and have an indoor pool, then that is still an option. The pool was old, so it needed a lot of work done to it to make it both efficient and more modern, so money would always have had to have been injected into that. But the main cost of a pool is the excavation and groundworks, which are already done. For us, the pool didn't make sense, but it's not gone, it's just hidden. As you'll have seen in a couple of clips, we do have another part to this building, and that space we transformed into a home gym last year. And if you'd like to see that project, then the link to that video will be down below in the description box. So this means we have a doorway between each of the two spaces, and we thought it would be best to install a pocket door so that we could maximise space as much as possible. We installed a pocket door, or rather Cal did, in our ensuite, and we love it. It takes up no room or wall space, and the door can literally be hidden. Cal assembled all the framework, and for anyone that might be interested, I will leave all details of little things like this pocket door down in the description box below. The next step was to clear the room and actually use the storage space that was the pool. I spent some time down there arranging everything into categories so that it was easy to see what we have, and of course I do love a bit of organising. Simon set to work on the walls, which needed frames so they could be boarded. In various projects, Simon has boarded the walls, and we've then had a plasterer come in to plaster over them. But plasterers cost money, and we were on a budget for this project, so instead decided to try the board and tape method. Once all the plasterboard was up and joints taped, Simon mixed up some easy fill filler and began applying that to the taped areas and over any of the screws so that the surface would eventually be smooth. After leaving the filler to fully dry, it was time for the first sand. Simon used our Ryobi multi-tool with a sanding attachment to go over all the areas of filler for a smooth finish. Some areas needed a second lot of filler, so that was applied and the process repeated. Left to fully dry and then sanded again until that wall surface was smooth. Another job to be done was to cut out the holes for the back boxes for the various plug sockets that had earlier been wired by Cal. All the cables were in place behind the plasterboard, and they'd been marked out so Simon knew exactly where to cut them and then pull them through. At this time, we didn't opt for any fancy sockets. That may make sense later on when you see what we actually wanted to use this space for. If we did want to change them in future, it's a very easy fix. The second application of filler was dry and had its second and final sand down. However, we couldn't move on to painting just yet because there was one very more dusty job that needed doing, and that was sanding the wooden ceiling. Now, I know many of you loved this ceiling, so did I. It had a very mid-century vibe to it, but unfortunately that was not what we wanted for this space. The pine wood had been coated in a very thick varnish, probably to protect it from the moisture from when this was an actual pool, but that meant it was going to be a tough job. I think Simon was rather hopeful at the start of this task, and he ambitiously set to work with just a little handheld sander, which had already done an excellent job on the walls, but alas, it just wasn't powerful enough or large enough for such a large area of varnished wood. So Simon asked to borrow a much larger sander from Cal, but in the interim he gave the walls a white base coat so that was one less thing on the to-do list. Leaving the paint to dry overnight and now having the larger borrowed sander, Simon started for a second time on that ceiling. Now, this video probably makes it look fast, but this took him a good few hours, even with the giant sander. Once the ceiling was wiped down of any loose sanding dust, then the primer could be applied. Now, I had the task of painting the same type of ceiling in the gym next door, so I know how hard it is to paint tongue and groove wood like this. You have to use a roller for the quickest and most efficient way of covering the flat parts of each plank, but then there are ridges between each piece of wood, so you then have to go over all of those with a brush to get in all the little nooks and crannies. It's painstaking work, and this was just the primer. I'd ordered some flooring samples and paint samples, so I was just going through those to decide on what I wanted to go for. To be more budget friendly, we had decided to stick to laminate flooring, and I had a range of samples in light wood effect shades. I laid them out in the natural light and just refined them down until I had my final choice. What I like about a lot of flooring companies these days is that they have the tool where you can upload a photo and visualise what the space will look like with a certain floor. They aren't always 100% accurate because the technology can't always gauge the scale of a room or the natural light, but it can give you a rough idea. And then on to paint. I knew I wanted a light and bright colour in here, and I wanted to colour wash the ceiling, walls and trims all in the same colour. We bought a few additional little green paint samples and then also used some of the paint that we already had that we've used in various other areas of the house. For swatching paint, I like to use the method of using an A4 piece of paper and painting that rather than painting the walls. Then you can easily move it about to see what it looks like on different walls and in different lights. I also use the flooring sample that I'd chosen to see how the light reflects from the flooring onto the paint, as this can have an effect, and this is why we chose to paint that orange ceiling. Otherwise, it would have given the room an orange cast. I once again refined my paint samples until I was left with the chosen one. We always budget for little green paint in any project. After years of renovations, it's just by far the best paint that we've ever used. It's a dream to apply, it's easy to touch up, and it has a really beautiful depth to it, and depending on the colour can really change beautifully with varying lights. But on this occasion, Little Green ended up sending us the paint that we needed for this project because we are such big fans, and for that we are extremely grateful. So my preferred finish is always their Intelligent Matte finish, which, as the name would suggest, is matte, but it's also very durable and scrubbable, so it's perfect for busy homes. Now you may be surprised to hear that this is not Joanna, my favourite little green paint colour. It is, however, a colour that we've used in both the gym and our guest bathroom, and it's called Linen Wash. This is such a beautiful shade, an off-white, not as stark and severe as a pure brilliant white, but it has a beautiful warm tone to it, so it never feels cold even when the windows are north-facing, which they are in here. The same paint was used to also do the ceiling, but this took Simon far longer than expected due to the reasons that I referenced earlier, so this job was split over 2 days. However, it was definitely worth it, although I can say that because I didn't do it, because it's brought such a light and bright feeling to this space. Now we're jumping forward somewhat to December because nothing more could actually be done in here until we received the flooring that we'd had on back order. That arrived at the end of November, and I'd made a bit of a mess with Christmas decor when I was doing our winter and Christmas home refresh. I essentially used this space to lay everything out so that I could see what I had and what I wanted to use. But as the flooring had arrived, it was time to clear up my mess and organise any unused decor pieces in the pool storage area, which I'm going to call the basement. We have lights down there, so it's easy to see, and everything had been organised with space to move about. After clearing up, the floor needed a good old sweep and hoover to remove any dust and debris in preparation for laying the flooring. Now, for convenience, when the flooring was actually delivered, we just brought it into the house. So it now needed to be transferred from the house into this building, which is separate, and then left overnight so that it could acclimatise. The following day, the underlay needed to go down first, and this came in sheets that could be cut down to any size. So it's easy to slot them in around doorways or any other little nooks and crannies. And then to attach one sheet to the next, we used aluminium foil tape, which creates a nice flat finish. The hatch is something new when it comes to our DIY projects. It's not something that we've ever had to work with before, so when laying the flooring, Simon thought it was best to try and figure out how it would fit with the hatch, and then once that was established, we could start laying the first length along the window side. The first few lengths were pretty quick, and then we got to the hatch, which required a little bit more thought. It was a little bit more fiddly with a few more cuts, and that slowed us down a bit. But once the hatch was passed, the final lengths were again pretty swift. It took us about 4.5 hours to lay this floor all in all. The following day, we came in to admire our handiwork and hoover again to remove any of the dust from cutting the planks the day before. You can see here that the hatch was still just a hole in the floor, but that does all come together later on. Simon just wanted an extra brain to figure out how the hatch was going to work, and that brain would be coming the following week. But essentially, the bare bones of the room were pretty much done. So this leads me on to the next task, and where I should probably let you know what we decided that this space will be used for. We had a lot of back and forth. I really wanted a games room, sort of hangout spot for watching sporting events, a bit of a man cave if you will. I had the whole vibe in my head, I'd created mood boards, but in reality, when we discussed it, we just weren't sold on how much we would actually use that space. And of course, the reason we decided to transform this space in the first place was because we weren't getting enough use out of the pool. So it was a very large waste of space that we could actually use for something else. So we decided to make this my studio for filming, hence the Ikea PAX that are being built here, which will provide one backdrop and I suppose a prop for me to film with. Up until now, I've filmed mainly in the room that we call the office, which hasn't actually been an office for the past few years, and Simon works at the dining table. So, if I have a dedicated filming space, then we can actually have the office back to being an office, and then we have our designated workspaces. And when we leave those spaces, we can properly switch off from work, which can be difficult when you work from home like us. Work and normal life often blurs into one. To anchor the flooring and neaten up the edges, we decided to add skirting board. This was pre-primed MDF skirting board, so it just needed to be measured, cut to size, glued and then nailed in place. You can paint skirting board before attaching it to the wall, but you still have to paint all of the joins and the filler along with any scuffs, so we just prefer to take the floor and do all the painting at the end. On to the final day and the last jobs to be completed. Cal returned to install the actual door into the pocket framework. We opted for a black frame door with reeded glass so that it ties in with the doors inside the house and still lets light through from one space to the next. The hatch cover needed some kind of handle for access so that it could be lifted out. We opted for a flush recessed pull handle so that it wouldn't stick up out of the floor and cause a trip hazard. This was measured, cut out, and then the flooring pieces were all cut to size and glued onto the hatch cover before fixing the handle in place. And there we have it, from indoor swimming pool to home studio with a basement. For us, this is a much better use of space given our job, and it isn't limited to being a home studio forever. There will be some people that think, oh, you've just made a white box. And yes, we have, because that is what a studio is. But it's also a blank canvas, and if you use a bit of imagination and even some AI, this room could be anything, either for us in the future or for a future owner. I hope this project reminds you that your home is your home. You have to use your space in the best way possible for you, because you live there. There's no point keeping features or spaces that don't work for you just because someone else might see value in it in 5, 10, 20 years' time. If you can preserve something but hide it, as we have done here, then great. But otherwise, your home should be just that, yours. But for now, that's it from me. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you next time from my new studio.